English in just a moment. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Valeria de parte del Community Language Co-op. Primeramente quiero agradecerles por priorizar la justicia, la equidad de salud a través de la justicia del lenguaje. Queremos que todos puedan participar completamente en el idioma de sus corazones. Si quieren escuchar en español, tenemos aquí equipo. ¿Hay alguien que no tenga equipo, que necesite equipo? Okay. Yes. Solamente también quiero pedirles que si van a hablar, si van a participar el día de hoy, por favor lo hagan en voz alta y a un paso conversacional, ya que estaré interpretando de manera simultánea. Si tienen problemas con su equipo, por favor vengan a buscarme en esta esquina y podré cambiarle su equipo. Hey, good afternoon. My name is Valeria with the Community Language Co-op. I first want to thank you all for prioritizing health equity through language justice. We want to make sure everyone is able to fully participate in the language of their heart or the language that they feel most comfortable with. I ask that anyone who is participating today, if you're speaking, please do so in a loud voice and a conversational pace, as I will be interpreting simultaneously. If you would like to, we highly suggest, if you do not fully feel comfortable with English and Spanish, we recommend you get a device. That way you can follow along if there is someone who is asking questions or wanting to speak in Spanish. I have some devices back here, so you can find me over on this side. Thank you.
Thank you. Does everyone have a seat? I want to make sure everybody feels comfortable and is great. All right. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and good evening to everyone. My name is Serena Gonzalez Gutierrez, and I am one of the council members at large representing the whole city of Denver. So no matter where you live in the city and county of Denver, whether you live over here in Westwood, or you live in Mount Bello, or you live in the north side, I am one of your council members at large. Before we fully get into things, I want to acknowledge today as Indigenous Peoples Day. The city and county of Denver passed, I was part of the group that passed the ordinance, the city ordinance, to create a actual paid city holiday to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day, which has been something historically that we have been trying to do and that our community has been fighting for decades, before I was even born. And so it's very lovely that we get to celebrate that and sit in this moment and also acknowledge not only the land that we stand on as stolen land of the various tribes, but also that we have to work and take action to break down the systemic barriers that have been put in place for generations and hundreds of years. So with that said, I want to thank you all for attending this evening and welcome you to this Latino Community Forum. Tonight we are coming together not only to learn and listen, but to also engage in a discussion about an important topic: police oversight and accountability. We know that this is important because our voters have voted at different times in the last 20 years to have accountability for the police through an independent group not associated with the police. So a couple of those examples were, in 2004, the Citizen Oversight Board and the Office of the Independent Monitor were created as a response to distrust in the police, especially from communities of color. Over the past 20 years, the Community Oversight Board and the Office of Independent Monitor have repeatedly been strengthened in their ability to oversee the police and jails and their independence from politics, including ballot measures that were passed in 2016 and in 2021. In 2016, the measure that was put forward was to make sure that the Office of the Independent Monitor lived in city charter. The difference between city charter and ordinance, where it was living, ordinance is something that can be changed by a council member. It can be taken off the books very easily. Through city charter, it can only be modified at the will of the voters, and only if it gets on the ballot, that the voters can decide whether or not they wanted to dismantle the Office of the Independent Monitor or wanted to make changes to it. The other bigger change was in 2021 that made the Independent Monitor no longer a mayoral appointee, and instead they are chosen by and reports to the Citizen Oversight Board. And we're going to be hearing from some of these folks here in a few moments. That's a huge issue, right? When you think about the fact that where the Independent Monitor was living prior to reported to the mayor. So does our police department. So does our chief, our sheriff. And so that's important to have that separation of, and have that kind of independence. All of these actions on the part of the Denver public show the commitment that we share towards building a safer and more fair and just society for all who live here in Denver. The three speakers here tonight bring their experience, knowledge, and dedication to the issue of police oversight, accountability, and of course, public safety, community safety. We welcome your comments and questions at the end after Chief Thomas speaks, and we know that accountability for police is not just something written in a manual or policy, but it is a promise that every person who interacts with our public safety personnel will be treated with respect, dignity, and fairness. I want to recognize, I see at least one person here tonight that I just want to note is joining us, and that is Sheriff Wiggins. Thank you for being here tonight, so I just want to recognize him. We want to thank some of our partners in putting this forum together, the Citizen Oversight Board, the Weekly Issue El Seminario, the Office of Independent Monitor, the Denver Police Department, the Latino Action Council, Denver Healing Generations, and the Community Oversight Board Community Engagement Committee. And lastly, of course, the Westwood Community Center for giving us this space and allowing us to utilize this space tonight. So thank you so much. If you're coming from one of those organizations, if you could just stand for a brief moment so we can recognize you and thank you for your help in putting this together. Well, I'm definitely going to read all this because I don't want to mess up all the information about it. So I'm going to do a brief introduction of each of our panelists here tonight, our presenters. And then after we go through introductions, we'll have each of them talk about what their roles are for the respective parts that they play. And then we'll go to questions from the audience, okay? Right now we're not doing any timing. However, if I notice that somebody might be taking up a little bit of space, I might interrupt you kindly and ask if we could, get to somebody else. I always like to lead by the rule of, if you feel like you're taking up a lot of space, then maybe take a step back yourself and give somebody else an opportunity. Allow a little bit of space for somebody else to maybe raise their hand or have a question. So, with that said, we'll start with Julia Richmond, the chair of the Citizen Oversight Board. Julia has a long history of working in complex organizations, overseeing large-scale changes. She was named as a 2022 Denver Business Journal Outstanding Women in Business winner, as well as a Colorado Governor's Fellow and graduate of the Leadership Denver. Born and raised in Colorado, Julia is committed to our community. She chairs the City of Denver Oversight Board and serves on the board of the Colfax Marathon. Professionally, Julia currently serves as the Chief Government Relations and Partnerships Officer for the GovTech AI company, CivCheck. Prior to that, she was with the University of Denver as the Senior Vice Chancellor for Operations and Strategy Implementation and the Colorado Governor's Office of Information Technology in 2020. As the Chief Strategy Officer, and later as the Deputy Executive Director. Julia was formerly with the City of Boulder, where she was the Chief Innovation and Technology Officer, as well as the Chief Innovation and Analytics Officer. Julia holds a Master of Public Policy from the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago and a BA from Dartmouth College. Welcome, Julia. Thank you for being here. The next person beside Julia is Elizabeth Perez Castle, Officer of the Independent Monitor. We call her the Independent Monitor. The Monitor. Liz, also goes by Liz, was appointed as Denver's Independent Monitor in January of 2023. She grew up the daughter of Cuban immigrants in New York City. Liz is not only the first woman to hold this position, but also the first Independent Monitor of Hispanic descent. Before her appointment, she worked with the Colorado State Public Defender's Office for 12 years, and then established her own private criminal defense practice in Denver in 2000. She was awarded the Chris Miranda Outstanding Hispanic Lawyer Award in 2022 by the Colorado Hispanic Bar Association. Prior to getting her law degree, Liz was a Spanish language court interpreter for Weld County clerks. And while she was a student, she was a police dispatcher for the University of Northern Colorado Police Department. As independent monitor, Liz provides independent civilian oversight of all investigations of alleged misconduct of the approximately 2,600 sworn police officers and sheriff deputies in the city and county of Denver. Liz received her law degree from the University of Denver School of Law and a BA, Bachelor's of Arts from the University of Northern Colorado. Thank you, Liz, for being here. Of course, last but not least, is Ron Thomas, Chief of Police, Denver Police Department. A lifelong Denver native, Chief Ron Thomas began his career in law enforcement as a Denver Department of Safety cadet. Shortly after graduating from Denver's Thomas Jefferson High School, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No,
I know I'm on the west side, but I am on north side.
We've never been good at softball.
That's not true, but sorry, I'll get back to it. In 1989, Chief Thomas joined the Denver Police Department, continuing a family tradition of public service to the Denver community. Since then, Chief Thomas has held numerous assignments, which include assignments as Commander of Police District 2, Police District 5, and the Internal Affairs Division. In 2018, Chief Thomas was selected as the Division Chief of Patrol, where he served until his appointment by then Denver Mayor Michael B. Hancock as Chief of Police for the Denver Police Department in 2022. Chief Thomas was reappointed under Mayor Mike Johnston in 2024. Under Chief Thomas's leadership, the Denver Police Department has made significant strides in keeping the Denver community safe. His priorities include lowering crime, improving response times, and increasing trust. To increase transparency, he launched public dashboards that provide access to crime statistics, response times, and internal affairs information. He has also made strides in community outreach by providing targeted information to the Spanish-speaking community. These initiatives reflect Chief Thomas's commitment to a safer and more transparent Denver. Chief Thomas graduated summa cum laude from Columbia Southern University and completed postgraduate study at the Naval Postgraduate School, the FBI National Academy, Northwestern University Command College, and the Senior Management Institute for Police. Welcome, Chief Thomas. Okay, well, thank you all so much for being here. And so we're going to go ahead and start with a brief presentation from each of our presenters here. And we'll start with Julia, and then we'll move on to the independent monitor.
I feel like I have to stand up since you were standing up.
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, thank you all for being here tonight. It was really important to the Citizen Oversight Board to help organize an event, and thank you to all the partners who helped make that happen. We have an important topic to discuss today, which we have been trying to daylight to the public since really the beginning of this year. I'll get into that in just a second, but just wanted to provide a quick sort of overview about the Citizen Oversight Board for those who are not familiar with it. Is this anybody's first time interacting with the Citizen Oversight Board? Good job. Yay! Okay. So for those who are sort of less familiar, the Citizen Oversight Board has three main responsibilities for the City of Denver. The first is to oversee the Office of the Independent Monitor. So we have the responsibility for hiring, firing, and managing the performance of the monitor and her office. We also interact with the monitor on a regular basis and engage with the topics that the monitor's office is engaged with. Second, we make recommendations on public safety, and so that is primarily regarding the sworn officers, but more broadly, anything in the public safety realm that is of concern to the public or that we see as an opportunity for improvements in terms of policy process or otherwise. Lastly, we have a broad responsibility and accountability to address matters of public concern and community concern. And so issues that may come up are things like breastfeeding in the jail, opioids, access to medical care by folks who are in our custody, treatment of community members at the hands of the police, and more broadly. And so we are a conduit for community concerns and complaints. One can make a complaint to the Citizen Oversight Board, and then we help route that to the appropriate entity, and we are able to sort of help follow and track that. In some cases, we help folks, resolve their problems directly, and in other cases, we bring resources to bear or to the attention of community members. So this. There we go. Okay, so this is what I mentioned. In terms of the recommendations to public safety, I'll just highlight a couple of things. We're able to make both policy level and case-specific recommendations. So case-specific would be Julia had an interaction with the police department that didn't go as she would have imagined, and so I have this case that's pending. Can the Citizen Oversight Board work with that? More broadly, we have the ability to interact on a policy level, and that's really what brings us here with you all today. So part of the work that we do on an ongoing basis as a board, and we meet very regularly, we meet every other week, and the first and third Fridays of the month. Those meetings are all public, and so you are always welcome to participate. You could bring your concerns to those meetings. You could ask us to address something in those meetings, but the point is that we are broadly representing the community in our oversight of the departments. So in terms of policy level recommendations, education-based development has been something that the board has engaged significantly on since we found out about it at the end of last year. The board has taken a very strong position on this topic for a number of reasons. One, we are always interested in improving the disciplinary processes for the police department, for the sheriff's department, and those that we oversee in the fire department, and feel that this is not a sufficient way of doing that we haven't really gotten at the root issue of the process concerns, and that we are not really doing this in a way that benefits either the community or transparency and accountability. And so that is something that we wanted to bring to you today, and of course our speakers will discuss with you those topics. I wanted to highlight a couple of other things that the board has been engaged on this year. So we uncovered in 2023 some issues surrounding lawsuits that folks had against the city. And sometimes those lawsuits, where they regard public safety, include sort of non-monetary settlements. And so what that means is, you might sue the city because you were harmed in an interaction with the police department, and that has a monetary settlement, but it also means that there's some training that needs to be done for the police department as a result of your interaction, because it turns out that maybe is a systems issue or something that happens to other people as well, and we want to prevent that from happening again. And so as a result of work that we did to uncover this issue and to work with council to develop some language, that will be going in front of the voters in November, or it's already been, I can't remember what the next step is in terms of the charter.
It's done.
Sorry?
It's ordinance.
It's done. It's ordinance. Okay, yes, thank you. So, thank you. I was like, having a brain fart.
Nothing more to vote on.
City Council passed an ordinance that now allows for better oversight and transparency into those non-monetary settlements, which provides a great deal of relief, at least to the Citizen Oversight Board, in terms of what the city's accountability is in response to these sort of painful incidents that often happen. Sometimes, the death of a loved one or significant harm. So we feel really proud of that work this year. We've also been engaged on a more significant strategic planning effort, and that strategic plan is available on our website, and so you can learn more about the work that we're engaging in and pursuing more significantly in the future. One of the things that we're committed to is better public engagement. The work that we do can often be sort of particular and heady and use language that's not necessarily that accessible to folks, and so we are committed to engaging with the community more often and more robustly, and so this is, I think, a good representation of that effort, and thank you to the Community Engagement Committee for helping with this. I'm happy to answer questions at the end of our conversation here, but just wanted to provide you an overview of what we're up to on the Citizen Oversight Board. Oh, lastly, if you are a member of the Citizen Oversight Board and you're here, could you raise your hand? I think we've got 5 or 6 folks. And so at the end of the forum today, if you want to engage with our board members, please do so, and thank you all for your participation.
Thank you so much, Julia. You can clap. A couple of things I just want to note is that, this is being put on as kind of a foundational, informational, right? We're learning, some of us are learning about some of these entities for the first time. Some of us have been aware of them for a long time. And so whatever your questions are, even if it's like, when does the COB meet? When does the Citizen Oversight Board meet? What do you do? If you want more details, please ask those questions. It's meant for audiences of all types. Those who are very familiar and want to ask very specific questions, like, as Julia mentioned, the education-based development policy that's being proposed right now, or you just want to know more information about what it is that they do. I will just point out before we go further, to make sure you did a great job, acronyms. A lot of us utilize it in our work, utilize them in our work, and so I just want to make sure our presenters know if you are using acronyms to try to spell those out as well, just because other folks might not be familiar with them. With that said, I'll turn it over to the independent monitor, Castle, to try to discuss it.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight on our Indigenous Peoples Day. Buenas noches a todos. Gracias por venir esta noche y estar presentes con nosotros. My name is Elizabeth Perez Castle. As was indicated before, you took the first 5 minutes of my statement. I was appointed the Independent Monitor in January of 2023. The head of the Independent Monitor's office, that position was open for 2 years after Nick Mitchell, who many of you know, left the office of the Independent Monitor at the end of 2020. So a lot of time passed before that position was filled, and been playing catch up since then, and happy to be with you tonight and kind of fill you in a little bit. The Office of the Independent Monitor reviews complaints and commendations that come in to us, and we are a civilian agency. So what that means is we are not part of the police department, and although we work for the City and County of Denver, we are an independent agency. The purpose of having an independent agency have eyes on complaints, and not as much commendations and complaints, is based upon kind of a community cry, a community demand in, I believe it was approximately 2003, 2004, is at least 2003, after the killing of a young man by the name of Paul Childs, who was killed at the hands of a Denver police officer. That was kind of a spark and the catalyst, but there have been many other incidents like that in which finally the community came together and said, no, you know what, our trust with the department is broken. We need to know that someone is watching out for our interests and can provide a can have eyes on it. In order for us to trust that our complaints are being heard, that there is accountability, we need an independent agency. So the Office of the Independent Monitor came into being I believe the ordinance was in 2004. We opened our doors in 2005. This makes our 20th year as an agency It's remarkable. It is remarkable for a few reasons. It's because it is a community-generated body. You made this happen. You insisted on it happening, and you have continued to support that over the last 20 years. And we couldn't address the issues within the departments and have the strength that we have if it's not for community voices. What we provide is the ability for community members to have trust that at least their complaints are being heard and that they are being seen. Because to have trust in the department, you need accountability and you need transparency. We are part of that transparency. So over the last 20 years, the OIM has an Office of the Independent Monitor. You'll hear us mention as Office of the Independent Monitor quite often. We have received multiple accolades, awards, have been identified by President Obama as the model for a good oversight system, and we have been referred to as the gold standard of oversight. We have issued reports throughout the years, not just our annual reports, but reports specific to incidents that have occurred. George Floyd, Michael Marshall are just some examples. We, to give you a little background on exactly what we do. First of all, as I'm in the job about 3 years now, a lot of people don't know what we do. We do not investigate cases. What we do is make recommendations. So the department will do the investigation. Complaint comes through, we have eyes on it from the moment it comes through to the moment it is done. The departments will do the investigation. We will make recommendations as to what the investigation should look like. If it needs more information, if it's good to go. Once we certify that that investigation is thorough and complete, it moves on to the discipline level. Then at the discipline level, again, it will be reviewed by the department. They will apply the facts to the policies to determine if there was a violation. We will also weigh in and give our opinion as to whether there's a violation and what, if any, discipline there should be. So we don't impose discipline. Eventually, those recommendations, both those of the independent monitor and the department, whether it be the sheriff's department or the police department, go to the director of safety. The director of safety makes the ultimate decision as to what the discipline will be. We issue reports to the community twice a year. We issue an annual report on March 15th of every year that covers statistics about discipline over the entire year prior. We also issue a semi-annual report that usually comes out in October. We anticipate this year's semi-annual report will come out the end of October that covers the first 6 months of the year. In addition to that, we have a policy team consisting of 3 PhDs who look at all the data that we receive from the departments, review it, and can make recommendations about policy, training, issues that need to be looked at, patterns, anything that we can flag that identifies either a conversation or publication to the community. So that's essentially what we do. I'm trying to condense it into 15 minutes, and I certainly am happy to answer any questions you have. At the end of the evening, if your question wasn't asked or answered, I will be here and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Oh, wait, I have 2 more minutes. Okay. So, yeah, a lot of folks ask, well, what power does the Office of the Independent Monitor have if you cannot impose discipline? And so one of the things I like to explain is if we were to be in charge of imposing discipline, then there would need to be another body to review our determination about what the discipline is. So we can escalate levels of oversight. This system has worked and has, like I stated, it is a gold model nationally, internationally, because of the fact that we are able to report to the community, we are able to give information to the community without talking about specific names of officers, and we do that because the ordinance says we can't publish the names of the individual officers, and we can get into a conversation about that. But as I stated, 20 years. For 20 years, the Office of the Independent Monitor has been publishing reports, giving information to the community, and is a success because you made it happen. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Monitor Castle. Next, we'll have Chief Thomas give us a brief overview of, you can talk about some of the policies, things that you have done in your time as chief.
Well, first, thank you all for coming. This is important engagement. I want to thank Rena especially because she's the one who invited me, and I think kind of initiated this engagement. So I certainly appreciate the opportunity. As was introduced, I'm the chief of police, so obviously I'm responsible for the overall management and oversight of the police department. Also, you heard kind of how I elevated to the position of this department, and heard that I was once the commander of internal affairs. There's kind of a story that comes with that. So, prior to being asked to be the commander of the Internal Affairs Bureau, I was actually commanding our Special Operations Bureau. So I managed our fugitive team and some other high-profile investigative units. And I remember being asked to take over internal affairs, and literally without hesitation, I said yes. I mean, I knew that it wouldn't necessarily be as fun as chasing around fugitives, but I thought it was an important thing. And I had convinced myself at the time that I was leading fugitive and special investigations that I was providing the most valuable service to the citizens of Denver because I was taking violent criminals off the street every day. And then I got to internal affairs, and I recognized that actually now I have the most important job to the community. Because, the truth is that everybody doesn't have an engagement with the violent criminal. Very few people, thankfully, have that unfortunate incidents. But, just about everybody has an engagement with a police officer, and a lot of times those engagements don't go the way they should. And so I felt that I had that responsibility of disciplining people when those engagements didn't go the way that they should, and trying to get them to understand how they are to engage with the community. So I really want to appreciate that opportunity, and I think it could build a foundation for me as I serve as chief of police. Some other things that I sort of identified, while working in internal affairs was that a lot of our misconduct that officers would engage in is essentially low level. And when I say low level, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have a significant impact on our community. What I mean is that like the outcome as determined by the matrix was likely to be an oral written reprimand, maybe a slight fine of time, but no suspensions, no terminations, anything like that. Understood that that it is important to hold people significantly accountable, especially if they do something significant to our community. It is important, and took very seriously the responsibility to walk people out the door when they demonstrate that they don't belong here. So deserve kind of an opportunity to serve the community. But as I kind of looked at the process, having left internal affairs and having even greater opportunities oversight over the entire police department, I recognized that there were some challenges with our current disciplinary process, and one of them is that particularly for those low-level infractions, they were not the outcomes were not very solution-oriented. And also, to get to those outcomes, it took a significant period of time to do that. So, sometimes 6, 8, 9 months to resolve a complaint that ultimately resulted in an officer getting, some notation in their official file or something like that. And so I began thinking about a year or so ago that we needed to change that process. And so let me talk about the education-based development process by beginning to talk about what it's not. And so it is not an attempt to erode or undermine the current discipline process. It's not an attempt to eliminate oversight from the disciplinary process. It's not an attempt to bypass the investigative process or sacrifice thoroughness for timeliness. And it's not an attempt to allow officers a freebie. What it is an alternative to low-level infractions, an opportunity to have a more solution-oriented outcome, and a way to better train officers to avoid policy violations by addressing underlying root causes, and really an opportunity to employ a more intentional formal process to an informal process that has existed since the beginning. And so, right now we have the opportunity to have a formal investigation, and then for some of the very same infractions that would go through a formal process, we actually have an informal process where likely the only outcome is like a journal entry or some training or something like that. And the problem that I find with that is that once it leaves internal affairs, we lose control over it. There's no consistency, and so I think that if we handle those incidents in a more formal manner, we can instill some consistency. I can make sure that everybody's given the same journal entry, everybody's given the same training, instead of a district deciding how to address a particular situation. And so I can talk about the mechanics a little bit of the alternatives to discipline process. The first thing that happens, so there's actually very little change to the existing process. So a complaint is filed, it's either received by our office or the Office of the Independent Monitor or the Citizen Oversight Board. It is then assigned to an investigator who investigates that complaint thoroughly. Regardless of how serious it is, regardless of what the likely outcome is, it is investigated thoroughly and then given to the Office of the Independent Monitor, who will then certify that investigation as thorough and complete. And so that will never change. What I am proposing as a change is if it is a eligible offense, and so I want to, I've got documentation that's on our website. There are 115 specifications that could be held against an officer, and of those 115, 75 of them, so 65%, right off the bat are ineligible for consideration. So, various integrity complaints relative to use of force, bias-related complaints. There are a number of complaints that are off the table right off the bat. The other thing that's off the table are repeated offenses that could be determined to be part of some sort of a pattern. Those are things that we're not going to consider for education-based development. Now, if it is one of those offenses that's not ineligible, if it is not part of, it's not a repeat offense, not part of a pattern of conduct, then there's I think another determination that is made, and that is, I can't think of a better way to really reference it other than to say, is it a mistake of the head or a mistake of the heart? Is this intentional misconduct where they knew the right thing to do and yet they did the wrong thing anyway, because that would make it ineligible, or is this, they simply didn't understand what the policy is and that's why they did the wrong thing in that particular instance. Now, those specific violations, I would propose to offer them the opportunity to go through education-based development, and so they would be given the offer to go through some education, as by accepting that offer, they are essentially acknowledging that they did something wrong and taking accountability by allowing themselves to be trained and educated on not just what the community expectation is, but what the department expectation is, so that they don't engage in that kind of conduct again. And then obviously if they do, then that again would not be eligible for further education-based development. Again, happy to answer any questions. I think to me the most important things to take away are, this does not take away the opportunity for oversight. This does not, I think, tear down the existing disciplinary process. I think this just provides an opportunity to deal with those incidents that have been deemed very low level in a more intentional way, a more solution-oriented way. And I think the additional benefit to that is we can process those much more quickly. So what happens now is there's an investigative process. It goes to the Office of the Independent Monitor for them to deem that it's thorough and complete. And then there's kind of a back and forth between our conduct review office and the Office of the Independent Monitor before ultimately it lands in a conduct review hearing, where ultimately the appropriate penalty is decided. And so what happens with most of these cases where the outcome is likely to be an oral written reprimand, maybe the fine of a day or two, go to the back of a very long line. And so it takes a considerable amount of time to process these cases and ultimately come to a resolution. I think that does a disservice to the community. I think it does a disservice to the officer. I think that it could instill distrust, because people are thinking, well, my goodness, what is taking so long to, the facts seem clear. What's taking so long for the department to acknowledge that this officer did something wrong and hold him accountable? And so I think that it would be a good service to the community to reach out to those community members that have been harmed by an officer. Let them know much earlier that, listen, this officer has acknowledged that they did the wrong thing, and they are going to be held accountable. They're going to be given specific training so that they clearly understand what our expectation is as an agency and what the expectation is of the community. And I think that is a much better, a much more solution-oriented outcome than just putting a negative notation in someone's personnel file. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief. Okay, we're to our questions portion, and before we break into that part, I just want to, one of the things I didn't mention earlier is just kind of, we want this to be a respectful place. Please don't speak over one another. If you have a question for a specific presenter, you can, just state that. Or if you have a question that is for all three of them, you could state that as well. We have just about an hour left for tonight, so we have, I think, plenty of time hopefully to get to folks' questions. And if we don't have enough time, and we heard from presenters that they would be willing to, follow up, or maybe even have a one-off before the end of the evening. So, with that said, I'll go ahead and start with questions. And so I see a hand right here in the back. If you want to, and feel free to introduce yourself. You don't have to state your name, but if you're comfortable, please do.
Good evening, everyone. Buenas tardes. My name is Alfredo Reyes. Also born and raised on the west side, so I had to put that out there. I'm also a proud member of the COB. And as we start today's conversation, I think something really important to remember is that we're all on the same side here. We all care about public safety. We want the best for our community. There's bad folk out there, and as I've gone on ride-alongs with DPD, also seeing firsthand how hard it is to be a police officer out in these streets. With that said, wanting to make sure that we take care of our community, that we take care of those that serve so selflessly. It's been a year now that we've been going back and forth with the EBD. Started as
No acronyms.
the education-based discipline that turned into education-based education development. And I hear that we all want the same thing. We're saying the same language, but taking different paths. My question for you, Chief, is why not work with the Office of the Independent Monitor, with the Citizen Oversight Board from the beginning to identify those bottlenecks, those pressure points, those parts in the system as it exists that has already been recognized to be the national standard, a gold standard that we're doing really well? Why not work with us to improve that system rather than create this new process? You know, we're not against additional training,
Sure.
obviously. So why go through this whole process that has opened up a lot of fissures, that has created a lot of mistrust, and created this tension where, again, we're using the same language, we want the same outcomes, but now there seems to be this divergence that didn't have to be there from the beginning.
Well, thank you, Alfredo. Good to see you. We have worked with the Office of the Independent Monitor relative to the understanding that there are some challenges with the process building of time that it takes. I know that that's something that the Denver Auditor just recently reviewed also. And I think that we have identified some things to do better and differently. You know, we used to hold a conduct review hearing for literally every single case. And then we stopped holding those hearings for, sorry, David, we stopped holding those meetings for cases where there was no disagreement. And so what ultimately has happened is that has really not even created a dent in the length of time that these cases are taking to resolve. And then I think at the end of the day, even if we were to do some things to speed up the process a little bit, I still think that what we're leaving on the table is the opportunity for more solution-oriented outcomes.
Second question. I have a young lady here in the middle. If you want to stand up, and then presenters, I'll just remind you if you can stand when you want to just projection goes over the crowd.
My name is Layla Villalpando. I'm with the Weeks Warriors.
Speak up a little bit if you could.
My name is Layla Villalpando. I'm with the Weeks Warriors. My question is for Chief Thomas. If I break a rule at school, I get suspended, ticketed, or expelled, and I am a kid, a child. If an officer breaks a rule, a citizen could lose their life. Why should an adult officer that's paid by Denver taxpayers not face similar consequences if they break a rule?
Wow. Great question. I would say that not all infractions that kids engage in school result in significant discipline, result in expulsion, suspensions, and things like that. I think that there are more solution-oriented outcomes that occur even in a school setting for kids that engage in misconduct or things that aren't acceptable in school. And I think, as we see in many other industries, the medical industry, the airline industry, I think most industries are really moving toward more solution-based, solution-oriented outcomes rather than strict discipline. Now, don't get me wrong, I do believe that there are opportunities where discipline, significant discipline, is the most appropriate outcome. But I don't always think that just because you misunderstand a rule or don't follow something because you don't quite understand or you forget, or you are overcome with all that you're dealing with and you make a mistake. I don't think that those are always situations that warrant discipline. So great question. Thank you very much.
Gentleman in the back.
Chief, I think another question for you. I don't know if all of them will be, but and maybe somebody else has a good answer for this. But you said there are 115 violations that a police officer could be accused of. You said there are about 75 that do not qualify for the EBD, for the education-based discipline.
Officer, would you not speak over the question so that we can actually hear the person asking the question?
Oh, the responses, okay, gotcha.
So I think you said that 75 do not qualify because they're too severe, if you will. That would mean that 40 do qualify for the program that you're proposing. Can you give us a sense of what would not qualify, and then maybe a sense of what the most dramatic or drastic or severe misbehavior that would qualify under the new program?
And real quick before you answer, Chief, it was it 65% or 75%?
65% are ineligible.
Are ineligible?
That's right.
Okay.
So that's
I just wanna make
out of
sure that's
115, out of 115, that's 70, that must leave, I'm sorry, 75, that must leave 40, right?
47.
Okay.
65. 65 and 45 makes enough, yeah, 65%
Yeah.
are ineligible.
I think 75 are ineligible.
75?
75 is.
I did not measure that.
75 total.
All right, let's go back to the 65, 35. Give me an idea of numbers that would apply.
So, and let me just,
Hold on 1 second. Let's wait till we calm down. I apologize. I messed this up. I'm not a math major. I'm a social caseworker. This is that. So I won't do that again. But Chief Thomas, go ahead.
so let me just talk about where we began. So where we began was I thought that everything that is in category A, category B, and category C, and those are all categories where the outcome is likely an oral reprimand, written reprimand, or potentially a 1 or 2 day fine, that those would be eligible, and that everything else in the D, E, and F categories where there's significant suspensions, terminations, that would be the kind of the line of demarcation. Then listening to some feedback from the COB and from the monitor, other community members, I realized that there are actually some violations that are in that A, B, and C category that should not be considered. And so I went back and looked at them, and then again with some community input, identified those 75 that are automatically off the table. And so just to give you a sense of, obviously, anything that has anything to do with integrity, so lying on a report, lying in an investigation, lying to, any of those integrity violations, automatically off the table. We never consider that for education-based development. Anything that has anything to do with a use of force incident, automatically off the table. And anything that has anything to do with bias, sexual misconduct, all of those things are off the table. So the kinds of things that are on the table, if you will, are not completing a report when you were supposed to complete a report. Not handling property in the way that you should have handled property, like deciding to check it in the next day instead of checking it in at the end of your shift as you're directed to by policy. So those are the kinds of things that would fall in that eligible category.
And I think Julia had a response as well.
I just was going to sort of highlight, practically speaking, how this shows up. So, if you take the list, and we've all done the math, many of the things on the list are ineligible. Those are things that are really bad behavior. However, the practical implication of this change means that about 75% or higher of the disciplinary actions that the police department is looking at are diverted away from the standard process. And so what we do in using EBD is create a whole new oversight or whole new disciplinary process for most of the things that are going through that, right? And so for very few kinds of discipline, we're actually using the oversight process to its fullest. And for most of the stuff, we're sort of doing this cursory look and very, as far as the COB is concerned, insufficient approach to sort of evaluating that. I'll use the chief's example of failure to file a report, right? Innocent enough, except perhaps you failed to file a report because you didn't do the proper investigation, or you didn't like the outcome of that report because it implicated one of your colleagues. And so in the case of failing to file a report, it could be quite innocent that you got busy and your shift took hold of the day and you didn't do the work. On the other hand, it could also be something else. Another example would be failure to turn on your body-worn camera, right? A fairly low-level offense, right? Maybe you didn't turn it on because you were distracted trying to help someone who was having a medical emergency. On the other hand, maybe you failed to turn it on because you were having a conflict with a community member, which was sort of showing you to be not a very honorable officer. So there are lots of examples where these sort of low-level offenses which would route to EBD are examples of things that are actually much worse. The other thing about EBD that is of grave concern to the Citizen Oversight Board is that we're skipping a deep investigatory step as part of the sort of off-roading to the education-based discipline process. And so why does that matter? It matters because sometimes when an officer is being investigated as part of the disciplinary process, more information shows up that creates that provides better information on the behavior of that officer. So for example, there's a disciplinary action which is fairly low level, and then there's an investigation which determines that that officer did that low level thing, except in that investigation they lied, right? But we're skipping that step where we would do the investigation as part of EBD, and we're not uncovering those kinds of things where an officer is showing themselves to be dishonest or lacking integrity. And those situations are often where officers are terminated, right? Because you lie in the investigation, right? And so we skip all of these steps that help to prove out the actual behavior of an officer and why perhaps they made a mistake. It could be a matter of the heart, but it could actually be a matter of the head, and they could be making that mistake, but we've never done the work to uncover the information. So I just want to provide a little bit more context where, first of all, it's off-ramping a huge amount of the discipline, and then secondly, these low-level offenses can often be both innocent and not innocent, and that really matters to the citizen.
So just to make sure, for acronym's sake, just to remind folks who might not be familiar with the terms, COB is Citizen Oversight Board, and EBD is Education-Based Development, if you're following along.
If I could just respond, you mentioned that that we would be bypassing the investigation that would uncover some of those facts. We would not. The investigation would continue as it always. We would conduct a thorough investigation. That's how else would we identify whether it was a mistake of the head or a mistake of the heart? How else would we identify the level of impact that an officer's mistake actually made? How would we identify the officer's integrity? So we as much as you think hold true to the need to have a thorough and complete investigation that would be certified, if you will, by the officer and monitor.
Thank you. I had a couple of people back here, and then I'll get to you. Okay? I have this gentleman, and then Ms. Helen.
Hello, my name is Axel. I'm with the Wheatland Warriors, and my question is to Chief Thomas. What happens if you get to do education-based discipline and the officers keep offending? How many chances do they get? How do the people know? And do the people get any say if they keep repeating?
So, great questions. Thank you, Axel. So, again, they get no other chances. So you commit that offense. That's your only opportunity to get that education that we are hoping prevents you from engaging in that same misconduct again. And then even if you did something similar but not the same, we would consider that a pattern of conduct, and so that would still be off the table for consideration for education-based development. The second thing is that everything would still be maintained in the database that we all share. So IAPRO is where all of the information related to an investigation is held, to include the outcome, the disciplinary outcome, and so all of that would be housed there. So we would have the opportunity to very quickly check to see, oh, they've done this before, or they've had a similar infraction before. So there's a process for us to identify whether or not, and then it's also a process that is, available to community. So we post all of these things on our website so you can see, the kinds of infractions that are held against officers. So, thank you for the question.
All right, we'll go right here, and then we have a period after this, and then I'll get to you.
My name is Helen Bradshaw. I think I know a lot of people in this room, but I want to make a gesture to, I'm just going to say it like it is, not pointing fingers, but taking opportunities where, when you asked that question before, I've actually talked to teachers that they're supposed to be filling out reports so that they can protect you in the place that you're at and meeting you where you are, and they're not following through. So I'm asking you guys, because there's a lot of arms and legs to making this work. And we gotta work together and not point fingers, because you're gonna miss something. So based on that, I've heard from teachers that they don't follow through with those reports, right? To me, I believe that's a great disservice to you guys, but I'm on the ground fighting for you guys, making sure that that does not happen. So if you need to contact me, holler at me, and I'll be there at your school, and I'll point out to teachers that don't respond, that I believe that you guys, you're missing a big piece of what could happen in a positive way, because there's a lot of arms and legs to making this work, that work, and the other. That's all I got to say.
Okay, no question. All right, great.
My question is for you, Chief. You mentioned in the proposed process of education-based discipline development that you would, or you use the pronoun we, would do the investigation that typically occurs, and that would not be left out by virtue of exercising EBD. Are you saying that you personally, as the commander, would do the investigation to determine if it was a mistake of the head or the heart? Or is there a panel of folks who would make that determination, and would you explain who that panel is?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think in the last week just kind of expounded on the process. And so the way that the process currently works, and will continue to work under education-based development, would be the case comes in from whatever route it takes. Our Internal Affairs Bureau, the Office of Independent Monitor, Citizen Oversight Board. Those investigations are assigned to sergeants who work in internal affairs, who conduct those investigations. There may even be more than one sergeant who's involved in interviewing every witness, all the complainants, all of the involved officers, whether they're witness officers or subject officers, and getting all of the facts as it relates to a specific case. And then it goes up the chain to their lieutenant and to the commander of internal affairs. And if at that point it is determined by the facts of that case that this is something that is eligible for education-based development and seems to be an appropriate outcome, then it is given to our conduct review commander, who would then be the one who makes that final decision. And I guess I'll back up. So we would make it. The Internal Affairs and the Conduct Review Office would make the determination that this is something eligible for education-based development, and this is something that we think is an appropriate outcome. That would then be sent to the Office of the Independent Monitor, just as every other case is. They would verify whether or not the investigation is thoroughly complete, and then they would also have an opportunity to make recommendations on whether or not it's appropriate for education-based development. It's obviously a recommendation, and we chose to go away from that recommendation. She has the same appeal opportunities to me, to the director of safety, to see that her recommendation as follows. And I'll just share with you that that process takes place pretty regularly, where we make a determination on whether or not to have something declined for further investigation or sent out for informal investigation. And if Ms. Castle disagrees, she'll reach out to me, and I think more often than not, I'm like, you know, I think you're right. I think that this is something that we need to formally investigate. I consider this to be a great partner, someone who I think we think quite alike many times, and so I think that often we would come to the conclusion that this would be an opportunity that's most appropriate to use education-based development. So it would not be me that's making it. I mean, I would ultimately have a say in the decision-making process, but ultimately it's that investigative team that is investigating it just like they would investigate anything else, and then using the facts identified in that investigation to determine if it's suitable or not.
If I may, Chief, how is that different? How is that process different from the one that exists currently that's being used?
So the difference is that if we decided to go the education-based development route, that officer would be made that offer, do you want to take education-based development? If they said no, then it goes the normal route. If they said yes, I'll take that opportunity, I'll acknowledge that I was wrong, I'll take the training. We can make that decision and complete that training probably in 30 days. And so, you know, whatever appropriate length of time that the investigation took, plus an additional 30 days for us to identify the appropriate training and get that officer trained, then we can make that, you know, outreach to the complainant, let them know how the case was resolved, rather than them waiting 6, 8, 9 months for a resolution that I think is much less solution oriented.
So when the decision, I'm sorry.
It's okay, right, we have a few other people who have questions.
I'm trying to understand the process. So when the decision is made to either use EBD or not, you're saying if that choice is not there because we're not using EBD, then it takes 6 or 8 months to implement the discipline?
Yes. Yes.
Why does that particular decision, that is the last decision to be made, why does that take so long?
So again, once the investigation is determined to be thorough and complete, now there's a whole process to determine, is there an actual policy violation? Where within the matrix does that policy violation fall? What is the appropriate disciplinary outcome? And these are all back and forth between Internal Affairs, the Conduct Review Office, and the Office of the Independent Monitor. And it's just that, and I'm not assessing any blame. It is just a lengthy process. And at the end of that lengthy process, once there's a determination made that, okay, now this is ready for a conduct review hearing, it goes to the end of a long line. And so we may have a case where an officer deserves to be suspended for 30 days, or where an officer deserves to be terminated. And we're waiting a while to come to that determination and actually provide that disciplinary outcome for that officer, get rid of that officer if that's the appropriate outcome. That decision is delayed because of the lengthy process. So I think if we were to peel away a lot of those lower level things where at the end of the day, they would probably be getting, a written or an oral reprimand or something very, much less in terms of outcome than a suspension or a termination. If we can get those out of the way, then I think the line gets shorter, and we can resolve those cases that do need a significant outcome much more quickly.
And what is the line you're?
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to go to some other folks, because we have
I'm just beginning to understand, to hear what the process is.
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand.
Great questions. I can Couple more at the end.
Believe me, when we had the presentation in council, I had lots of questions that I didn't get to ask, so, and I'm thankful that I've had briefings from the chief as well, so this is important why we're here with the community, right, so that these questions can be asked. But also don't forget that we have our chair of the Citizens Oversight Board, and we also have our independent monitor, who may be also able to answer some of these questions as well, about like the investigations and things like that. So I have right here, and then I have Dr. Calero.
Please accept my apology.
You're okay, you're okay.
My name is Zarai Gallegos. I'm here today with the Weekend Warriors, and my question is to the Citizen Oversight Board or Office of the Independent Monitor. And what can we do as youth, or what can our families do if we want our voices to be heard about this issue? You know, we talked with families in the community, and we're all pretty concerned about the issue that's going on. We just kind of want some insight on what can be done. Good question.
Thank you. Excellent question. Thank you for standing up for the youth and who you represent, because we all know you have contact also with law enforcement. It doesn't end when you're less than 18. So for me, I think a lot of this, talking about the details and talking about the intricacies of the policy, is kind of putting the cart before the horse. Gotta get my acronyms. Fundamentally, what the chief is asking is he is asking to change the discipline system. The discipline system we currently have is called a matrix system. It was created in 2008, and the purpose of the discipline system was to have a formal way to be able to discipline officers, one, so that they know exactly what it is that's going to occur if they violate a rule. Two, to be able to actually sustain officers and find a way that if they continue to commit violations, those prior violations will escalate the discipline that is going to be received. And part of the problem back in 2008 was that, frankly, the department had a difficult time firing officers because it was based upon a different system. It was based upon kind of a comparative discipline system. So no officer could get worse than the officer before them. So this was a more fair way, not only for the community, but for the department. But the way that this system came together was based upon collaboration between community, law enforcement, the city. From the mayor's office to academia to city council members. There were professors involved, the city attorney's office was involved, I believe maybe even the DA's office was involved. Currently, if you want to know how our discipline system came together, there was a report issued, the manager of safety's report in 2008 adopting the matrix system. That report is currently on the COB website, and you can find it under historical documents. I urge you as a community, this is a really important decision. And I urge you to look at how they came about with the matrix system. The model as to how to address discipline is there. It is there for you. It took this commission, this task force, 4 years, 3 years for sure, a little over 3 years, to get together on a continuous basis. They broke up into groups, they took the best research, they did research themselves, and bring all that together to decide what the discipline system would look like and what the appropriate discipline system is. That is the piece that is missing here. And what is important about that is that the people who were part of that task force were educated. what concerns me about the way that this has been rolled out is, and I appreciate the chief accepting our recommendation to put the draft policy on their website. So right now, the EBD draft policy is on the DPD website.
Education-based development.
Yes, education-based development is on their website, and anybody can read it. And they also have a forum in which you can give input as a community member about education-based development. My concern is community members may not know what they're reading. The discipline system is incredibly complex and is many, many, many pages long. And while the Citizen Oversight Board and the OIM can give input, it is important for you, the community, to give input as well. But how do you? If you don't know what you're reading, it's really hard. I'm not saying that it's hard in the sense of the average community member can't read it. I'm saying it's hard because you don't know the background. You don't know what the whole discipline system looks like. You don't know what it's supposed to look like. So to take something and then try and decipher it and make a recommendation, I think is not getting us to where we need to be. I think we're talking about a discipline system. We're talking about safety for our community, safety for our officers. And this cannot be rushed, and it cannot be done without knowledge and full input from the community. The gentleman earlier said, so I apologize, going back, we need to, if this is going to happen, we need to follow what we did in 2008, where I think over 100 different types of people that were involved in changing and creating that discipline process. We need to do that again. Because this is not just for now. This is for forever. And you need to be heard, and you need to decide, just like the community decided back in 2008, what the appropriate discipline was for every category of violation. What EBD does, and I know I'm going on and then I'll sit down, is it takes offenses that are what are considered, the categories go A through F. I don't want to get in the weeds because it gets complicated. But A through C, it takes certain offenses and you take away discipline, and what they're going to impose is training instead. They can do that now. According to our current discipline system, they can impose training as discipline. So they're not doing it. We need to know why it's not being done. But it is more than just a couple of days, suspended days. It can be all the way up to 6 suspended days. This gentleman asked, what is an example, like worst case scenario? Search and seizure. Stopping folks on the street, cuffing them in front of their neighbors, in front of their kids, in front of their business partners, in mostly or quite often in neighborhoods that are of color. That is an incredibly impactful encounter. And that is EBD.
So, thank you so
Yeah.
much, Mr. Monitor. I just want to pull out the things that I think the question that you asked was, how do you get involved? How do you learn about these things? And you mentioned some of those ways. There's information on the websites. We know that on the police department's website, they have posted the current draft policy. On the Citizen Oversight Board's website, they have the actual discipline matrix that was created years ago. And I'm sure there's a bunch of other information. But what I will say to you is also showing up at events like this, if there are other opportunities to interact with any of these folks or other people that are engaged in this work, it's incredibly important. It's also, you can also email me. You can email your city council members, your policy makers, decision makers, reach out to them and ask for some time to meet with them about what your concerns are as well. Many of us host town halls or community coffees and things like that, so there's many different opportunities, and also public comment, which I believe some of the young people have come and participated in on our youth nights. With that said, I'm going to go next to, I have Dr. Calderon, and then I have the gentleman here, and then I have Rufina.
Yeah, I'll defer to Jason, and then I can go after you. Yeah.
Well, my question was, what happened to the programs that used to kind of bring the community and the police force together? There was a program called Cops and Kids run through the Office of Independent Monitor that in the morning time, cops had to go to implicit bias, kids had to go to Lyric, Learn Your Rights in Colorado. After in the afternoon, they got together, had candid conversations on police stops and what to do in situations where there was interaction between police and kids. I think those programs going away have made things worse for our community. If we bring those kind of things back, these young people will definitely benefit from those kind of things, because we would have less issues that we would have to be discussing disciplinary actions, because the cops and the kids would know how to act with each other. And I was just wanting to know when we could bring something like that back.
It never went away. Nicole Taylor, stand up. She is our outreach director for the Office of the Independent Monitor. She runs the Kids and Cops program. Our partner traditionally have been DPS. Since COVID, we have really struggled to get back into DPS. That was, we would just go from school to school to school. So Kids and Cops program, one of the things that we do is we teach youth about their rights, because you do have rights, and avoids confrontation. We also train officers on youth development and brain development and all sorts of topics. We, like I said, we've struggled to kind of get that program going. It's actually now ramping up and ticking up. Unfortunately, due to budget cuts, our budget for Kids and Cops program for next year was cut. However, I believe we will be able to continue the program. It may be in a smaller setting. It may be pizza instead of a full lunch. And the chief stepped up and has covered the cost of, because we pay the officers time and a half, the cost for all the officers for next year. So please, if you're interested in the program, contact Nicole Taylor, and we will find a way to make it happen.
And we integrate that into situations like this?
We will go anywhere.
Okay.
No, what I'm saying is, less this, more that.
We can talk more about that in a moment.
Okay.
I want to go back to questions from the audience. I have Dr. Calderon, and then Rufina, and yes.
I'm Dr. Lisa Calderon, and I'm glad to be back in Westwood. I lived here as a child, went to St. Anthony's, so good to be here. I want to thank first and foremost the young people.
Yes.
The fact that you took the time, did your homework. And I want you to know, as also a college professor, I would love to have you in my classes. First of all, you're prepared, but also you're the experts in your own lives. You don't need any adults to come in and advocate and tell you what you need to do or not to do. And that is why I have, for 20 years, fought for police accountability because of young people and my son being assaulted by the Denver Police Department. What I'm concerned about is the slippery slope when we start to slowly diminish. I don't care how small it seems like or is being made to seem like. It is an erosion of the things that we have fought for the past 20 years for police accountability. What Chief Thomas is proposing, without community input initially, and with the input of the police union, is to have a diversion for cops That's what he's really proposing.
Dr. Calderon, is there a question?
Yeah, I'm getting to it. But we also have to have context, right?
Right.
So when we chip away and we don't have our input, and here's my question, we don't have our experts at the table, how can we possibly trust what you are telling us is in our interest? Because I've heard a lot about what's in the cops' interest, but not what is in the victim's interest. Latinos, young Latino males, are the most disproportionately harmed and killed and violated by the police. So any kind of rollback is problematic. My specific question to you, and this is not about pointing fingers, because when we're critical thinkers, that is not pointing fingers. My question to you is, the last time we met, you said you would have researchers, local researchers, working with you. And instead you brought all white researchers outside of the Denver area, out of state even. What are you going to do to make sure that we have researchers who reflect our community, who speak our language, who are part of our cultural experiences, to be at the table talking with you when you want to reduce discipline, that they are also there at the table holding you accountable?
I'm happy to have those conversations with those experts. I mean, I engaged with people who I knew were in the field and had experience with programs similar to the one that I was coming up with, and so I knew that, I learned that you don't want to have a battle of experts, and so I'm not going to engage in that again. But I'm certainly happy to sit down with experts who are culturally responsive to the communities that are treated here today, to have some of the same discussions.
I guess for that point, just real quick, so maybe for context, because if folks are, interested in continuing to engage in these conversations, how long is the policy going to be up still for, and how long before any kind of move is potentially made? Just so the community has.
Yeah, fair question. And so, I have continued to move back the period of time in which the policy is still available. I have no timetable really in terms of how long that will be made available. I can assure you it will be made available through the end of this month, likely even further than that, because I want to continue to engage in these community conversations and continue to get community input.
Thank you. Next, I have Regina.
Hi, Chief. Regina Hernandez, Citizens Oversight Board. My question to you is going to be linked to the training part of this. Having been a former trainer in the past, I know that what I'm hearing from you is that you're going to assess a particular situation, and then you're going to develop a specific training for that situation, for that individual. Having been a trainer in the past, it takes a while for those kinds of individualized kinds of situations, scenarios. I'm trying to figure out why aren't they getting that training already? That's a really important question for me. And in the past, you've answered that they're going to get emotional intelligence training. They're going to receive perhaps, if they violated a code or a law, you're going to give them that kind of specific training. But it kind of doesn't make sense to me right now as to why they're not receiving those kinds of trainings already. And if they are receiving that kind of training, why isn't it not taking hold? That they go and violate these and make it necessary for you to train them again. So if you could help me understand then how this training piece is supposed to work, and then how you're going to evaluate the success of that training, because that's also another component of training, is you can't just continue to train your way out of this situation.
Sure. So, as you've spoken to, there are a number of specific trainings as it relates to emotional intelligence and other trainings that we've set aside that we think will address a number of the underlying issues, and then obviously very incident-specific training so that they clearly understand the policy that was violated, and also, again, understand the department's expectation and what the community's expectation is in those or similar situations. And so much of the training is already developed, or we're in the process of developing. And then, obviously, I think that we can develop training specific to the incident once we have a clear understanding of what the incident is and what the violations are. And, again, as I said earlier, much of this is an effort to formalize what has been an informal process for a long time, since the existence of the matrix. And so I would offer that this is not changing the matrix, this is just more formalizing where we operate outside of the matrix. And so many times, we receive cases and then decide, often in concert with the Office of the Independent Monitor, that this doesn't require formal discipline. We can handle this, informally. And in essence, what that means is send it back to the district or send it back to the unit that that particular officer works for, and then we really lose control of it. Maybe they make an entry into their journal. Maybe they give them specific training. Maybe they give them the policy that they violated and have them study that. Maybe they have them watch a video on Police One or something like that. We literally lose control of it. So what I would like to do is take better control and more intentional control of it. So I'm making sure that the officers receive certain training, making sure that's consistent across violations, making sure, and then again, outside of just the recognition that, because those informal cases are also documented in IPRO, so the Independent Monitor and I have awareness of that. But we're not really aware of what took place after that, and so I would like to have more intentional control of what takes place after that, so that we can better evaluate, did what we do work? And so, I would like to study, to have an independent study done. I did identify someone who could do that. It's been pointed out to me that there's a lack of trust with that particular situation because it's someone that has a previous relationship with the police department. Totally honor and respect that, and so we are in search of another evaluator, because I too would like to evaluate whether or not this is effective. If this doesn't reduce recidivism, if this doesn't reduce complaints, if this doesn't speed up the process, if this doesn't provide a more solution-oriented outcome for all involved, then I don't want to do it anymore either. But I think I need that input in order to make those decisions.
If I just may respond quickly, there is no best practice research that says education-based development or education-based discipline either helps recidivism, makes the community safer, is better at holding officers accountable, that there'll be less incidents of violations. And my concern is putting something in place before the research is done, which is essentially making us kind of the guinea pigs of this program. What if it goes? I know, obviously that's not their intent, and I understand what the chief is saying in his desire, but it is not as simple as, written reprimands and oral reprimands. It goes all the way up to 6 days. There is a lot of detail here that still needs to be ironed out, and we don't have any research to prove that it works. So I would argue that the research should come first, then if it is appropriate, implement the program.
My name is Ann Carly, I'm a resident of West Denver, but I'm also a member of Together Colorado organization. like what Chief Thomas is saying is, one of your biggest concerns is that this process takes too long to do, up to 9 months. And I would like to pose a question to the Office of the Independent Monitor, Ms. Basil. If you also agree that a problematic piece of the current process is that it takes too long, and what would be your proposal for how to address that?
Certainly. Oversight takes time. So reviewing a case, making sure we get it right takes time, and that is a necessary part of oversight. And in order for us to do that, so remember, officers also have tons of due process rights. If they are disciplined and they do not agree with the discipline, a settlement can be reached with the Director of Safety. If that doesn't work, then they can appeal it to a hearing officer, and at that point, the OIM is out of it, because we don't appear in hearing cases. If they don't like the decision of the hearing officer, then they can appeal it to the whole Civil Service Commission. If they don't like the whole Civil Service Commission decision, they can appeal it then to the district court, and they can follow that all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. So when we spend the time that is necessary to review a case and make sure that our recommendations are solid and we can support them, yes, that takes time. And we won't apologize for that. What I also know is that I'm an office of 14, 15. I have 5 monitors. They're the ones that do that review the investigations. No, excuse me, 4 monitors who review the investigation. So when the investigation is done by the departments, these and their attorneys, they review that information to decide if the investigation is thorough and complete. I have 1 deputy monitor who then, once it goes on to the discipline review, is doing all of the discipline review. We're a small office. We have a small staff. Our office has not been staffed the way, the department has, frankly, and our funds continue to stay stagnant while safety's budget continues to go up. And I'm not talking now about how should we get a percentage of the budget, whatever it is. It's just the facts. Right? We are a tiny office, we're doing the best we can. Recently, I have moved some people around so that right now where it seems to be the backlog is in discipline. So I've added another monitor and potentially another monitor. But I'm going to rob Peter to pay Paul, at least for a while. What we need is staff, we need resources, and we need funds from the city. That's what I can do. And I'm certainly happy also to discuss with the chief, are there alternatives? You know what my position is regarding education-based discipline, but is there something else that we can discuss and agree on?
Yeah. So a couple of other things that are worth mentioning. So we talked about the investigatory process, right? That takes a few months. Within the police department, there's also the contemplation of discipline process, which is where the department, internal affairs, decides what kinds of discipline applies to that specific behavior. That can take up to 6 months. And that's entirely within the police department, right? So if we looked at a 9-month period, 6 months of that is within DPD itself. We could actually, make some changes to the process. I think, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, we've never sat down to have a conversation about the problem. Do we agree that what the problem is, and do we have facts to indicate where the problem exists? And that's really what the Citizen Oversight Board has been arguing for all of these months, is like, let's sit down and have a conversation where we can collaborate on improving this process. No one wants a longer process than it needs to be. No one wants discipline to be very far away from the behavior that the officer displayed, right? But we've never really started from, do we agree on the facts, and do we agree on where the problems are? And so I think that's, we can talk about all the details about education-based discipline, but at the end of the day, we've never had the first conversation about what problem we want to solve together.
That's really interesting. I'll just say another kind of task force that some of us sit on together is this surveillance technology task force that's happening right now. And in that space, and Chief, you've been part of some of those meetings, or I think all of them, and Julia, you've been there as well, and I'm on it as one of the council members. Oh yeah, we're all on it. Sorry. Yeah, everybody. So what's really interesting is that we have folks from different factions of disciplines. So you have, law enforcement, you have people in the tech kind of world who understand technology, how rapidly it's changing. We have professors who are versed from different perspectives on the issue of utilizing technology with policing. And so it's very interesting because we're able to get information from all these different angles and different spaces so that hopefully we can come to some kind of resolution about how this technology is utilized in our communities. And so hearing that, it just reminds me of like what we are doing in that process and how that could potentially be helpful maybe in what's happening here, in the fact that I know this has been out there for pretty much since the beginning of the year, I think. With that said, I'll go back to questions. So I have right here.
Hey, I'm Jessica Calderon, West Denver community member. I'm also a social worker in practice, specializing in macro practice, and I have experience in policy innovation as well. So my question is, I'm hearing that there's like 45 infractions which might require specialized trainings. That seems like a lot of use of resources to create trainings. I don't know if those trainings would be evidence-based or not. And so what I'm thinking about, and I've also heard that this is not grounded in any kind of research. And so when you think about social innovation and policy, typical best practice if you're going to innovate is to pilot first and to work with your stakeholders to pilot and then scale up after you know that it works and it's an efficient use of resources. And so what is the plan for partnering with stakeholders, designing a pilot, and then monitoring the pilot and seeing how it's going before we just scale up and use an incredible amount of resources at a time in our city where we are literally broke, basically. That's my question.
Great question. So, certainly open to considering a pilot, but in terms of resources, I mean, we already have individuals that their sole job is to do professional development, and so they, in partnership with the academy, will be the ones that will be responsible for creating these trainings. And again, while I know that there is no evidence base to suggest that this works in policing specifically, I do think that there is considerable evidence that this works in other similar industries, whether we're talking about the medical industry, the airline industry, industries that have, that they're responsible for people, and so I do think that there are some parallels.
And just in a quick response is just that's what policy innovation is about, right?
Sure.
Like transferring things that work in other areas, but still working with stakeholders and piloting before scaling up and using those resources. I think it's important.
Thank you.
Can I see a show of hands of how many people have questions? Because we have only about 4 minutes left and I want to try to get to everybody. So 1, 2, 4, 5. Hi, I'm sorry, yes, I'll get to you. And wait, raise them again, please, so that I can see everybody. 1, 2, 6. Okay, we'll start up here in the front. And then I wondered if it would be okay with folks if we asked the last remaining questions and if they could answer them unless with that. Yeah, in a few minutes, yeah. So if you want to ask your question, then I'll go to the next person and the next person, and then you guys just write down and answer those questions. So.
Thank you. My name is Alexander Landau, Director of Community Advocacy for Denver Alliance for Street Health Response. And just given the time constraints, I will try to be quick. I myself am a survivor of law enforcement violence, Chief. As you know, in District 6 in Denver, I was racially profiled and beaten almost to death, laughed at and called a nigger, and then falsely charged with criminal intent to disarm a peace officer. My case took 4 years to reach resolution and no officers were disciplined, but what's important is what happened after the first 6 months. The officers were not even placed on administrative leave, but allowed under the current discipline matrix to move on to hurt other members of our community within two separate incidents that occurred in 6 months. One of my major concerns is trusting the training facility. The training facility, in the most recent case of Victor Moses, who was a cadet who was brutalized at the facility during what they call Fight Day, where he was assaulted by 5 other training officers and sent into a sickle cell anemic seizure and went into shock, went into a coma, received multiple skin grafts, got both his legs amputated, and had his life changed forever for wanting to be, again, a police officer. And so I wonder, how can we trust the academy responsible for changing this man's life, which will also result in a hefty civil settlement in the near future with such a policy? And then my question for you, Liz and Julia, is can we implement a lot of these same, if not everything that's in education-based development under existing policy as it currently stands? And it seems to me that this should be something that should be front-loaded, not loaded on the tail end. This is something that should maybe even begin in the Civil Service Department or the Civil Service Commission when they're taking their exams before they even hit the academy. And so I guess I would wonder, in a time where we just suffered $125 million budget cut from DDPHE, Denver Department of Public Health and Equity, directly impacting alternatives to law enforcement like the STAR program. And Sheriff Diggins, you will understand this because what's going to happen is complaints will go up. We are having alternatives to law enforcement be cut, which means individuals will be being interacted with law enforcement, which otherwise could be handled by a professional. And Sheriff Diggins, you will see the brunt of this when they start showing up in your facilities. And so I'm wondering, how can we be more proactive? Instead of giving officers raises and looking at a $70 million training facility, how can we ensure that there's equity in departments like the Office of Independent Monitor and other behavioral health entities who do just as important work as our first responders?
Oh, okay. That was a good question. Okay, I have the person in the far back and then over here. Go ahead.
Just real quickly, I'm Jackie Long, and I do know this chief. You know, one of the things that touches his heart is youth and young people, and we have a group that I'd like to offer, since the woman in the middle said there's no funding, then we offer it for free through the chief. It's called Club Law. It empowers the kids. You do your own thing. We bring the food. You learn about constitutional law, civil law, and the kids do their own Q&A. We bring judges, lawyers, everything. I'm offering it for free through the chief.
Thank you.
I just had a question in regards to pay. While they're going through this process, police officers are going through this process of investigation. Are they being sat out and still getting paid, or are they being sat out and not getting paid? Because if they're being sat out and getting paid, then it doesn't create an accountability if they're still receiving a benefit as they're not working, as opposed to being sat out and not getting paid, and serving as an example to the rest of the police officers, like, oh, I better get my act together, because otherwise this is the consequence. I don't know.
As they're going through the process, whether or not they're still receiving pay.
Yes, is my question, and it sounds like some might or might not. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it's common knowledge or not common knowledge. It's just a question I have.
Okay, we have that written
Yes.
down. We'll have it answer them all together. Sir.
Hello, this one will be for Chief as well. Just thinking ahead and, you know, say next couple of years, if there is community meetings, there is revisions and educational-based development does take place, like how will you, DPD, measure success, like if this program is effective?
Right here. Hi, I'm Sarah Nichols from Together, Colorado. Mine's a yes or no question, really quick. It sounds like the Office of Independent Monitor is hurting for funds, and that would speed up the process if they had more funds. Would you be willing to look at your budget where you can cut some money and work with the council to earmark it for the OIM? And right here in the blue, up here.
Hi, my question is, if there's frustration with the process, the discipline process, with like how long it's taking, why not break the barrier of like, from what I've heard, as of now, the discipline process is there's a complaint received, then it's assigned to an investigator, then handed over to the independent monitor. Why not break that barrier and just disperse those complaints, or have the independent monitor, the community oversight board, and the department receive the same complaint at the same time, if you want to cut the time.
All my questions? I think so. All right. Sorry, guys. But who wants to begin?
You know, the mayor does this quite often, as you know, and he talks about, you know, like taking a bunch of orders, like wait staff at a restaurant and trying to get it all correct. So I know.
I'll try to remind you.
I mean, Alex, you know, I appreciate your question and your passion and your concern, particularly as it relates to academy staff. Can't talk a lot about, you know, what happened at the academy with Victor Moses. I can tell you that the facts that you stated are in significant dispute. We have had our academy evaluated by Colorado Post twice since that incident. They have, you know, they have determined that everything that we are doing is appropriate and necessary for appropriate training of officers before they go out on the street. But certainly a concern that we want to continue to look at. And then as it relates to whether or not officers are paid while they're under investigation. So if an officer is charged with a crime, then they are removed and they are unpaid. But if they're being investigated for some sort of infraction, particularly if it's an infraction that would likely only result in some sort of low-level discipline, they continue to be paid during that time. But I think again that calls back to the reason why I want to move forward with my proposal, because those officers that do need to be terminated, or those officers that do need to be suspended without pay for lengthy periods of time, I want to get to that resolution much more quickly. And so I think this will help with that. And then measurements of success. You know, my measurements would be, you know, is there a reduction in overall complaints? Is there a reduction in recidivism? Is there, I think, improvement in the process? Does it move much more quickly? So those would be my measurements of success. Open to, you know, to hearing from the community what they would like to see in terms of additional measurements of success. And
Transferring funds from the
yeah, and so, I mean, I will be honest and say that I have gone through my budget pretty significantly and you know, and cut out nearly $13 million worth of funding in order to you know, move forward with essentially a zero growth budget for 2026. I don't know where else there would be to provide additional funding. I mean, you know, certainly I can empathize with the challenge that she has with a relatively small office. You know, I have a relatively small office too in terms of the number of supervisors that are charged with investigating cases. We have taken a look at ways to upstaff that, and we have done so. We also are looking at ways to have investigators, you know, roll in and sort of on a training basis, just to, you know, kind of increase capacity. So, but I'll get thoughts.
I think part of the question I think that Mr. Landau had mentioned was around the other preventative type of measures or mechanisms like STARS, one of the things that is more well known. How is those things are being cut and we're not seeing maybe the same level of things, or there's just not an equal footing, I guess, maybe the question is, well, we're cutting those, then does that mean we're going to see more law enforcement interaction and potentially more people in jails?
I'll be honest, I do think that that's a potential hit because there's not the funding that STAR uses or needs in order to have those engagements. That's more likely that those calls will be diverted to a law enforcement officer so that we can resolve that and address the issue. I fully recognize that often we're not the experts, we're not the best people to address those situations, especially when they're not criminal. I would call out the fact that you can indicate to the dispatcher that it is a star-only response that's desired, and so it may take additional time for there to be a star response, but at least we have an understanding that that an officer is not needed, not required, and not desired. So.
And the last question, I think all three of you could probably answer from the young lady here who asked about the process. And is there maybe a different solution that everybody gets the complaint at the same time? And I think that's a good question for all three of you, actually.
Yeah, since I'm already saying I'll address that, and thank you for, that was one thing that I missed on the menu item. But, so we already kind of have a similar process. So there's already oversight during the investigation. So Monitor Castle assigns an individual to monitor most investigations, and so they already have some insight into the interviews that are done, the investigation that is taking place. They're not conducting that investigation, but they are overseeing it, and so they're familiar with the case, which I would hope shortens the amount of time that they need to process the case before it moves back to us for further resolution.
Thank you all for your questions. Starting with you, Alex, I'm just going to address the part of it that I can, which is in terms of training, and I think I speak for Julia, training is already available. Training is already part of our discipline system. We don't need a new system to do training for officers. And I mean additional training. What would be missing, what is missing from education-based development is the accountability portion, right? A harm has been committed. How is that harm going to be addressed? So I think it was Dr. Calderon indicated that, you're hearing what is good for the department, and certainly a better trained officer is a better street officer, but that's not the end of the discussion. And maybe they don't get EBD for the same or a similar violation, but they continue to commit all sorts of other violations.
We have it all at the same time. I think that was her question. That was her question.
Yeah. No, but what I'm saying is that the consequence is it is not addressing the harm. So there was a question about training. They can do that already, but that's insufficient. Second one that I had was, I wasn't sure about the officers getting paid. I think the chief has answered that. How we measure success. One of my concerns is if the measurement for success is there's less complaints, I have a problem with that. And the problem is that if you're not disciplining officers for anywhere from 65% to 85% of complaints, think about that number. 65 to 85% of complaints, community's going to say, why bother? Why am I going to file a complaint if they're just going to get training? Nothing is going to systemically change. And so if you don't file a complaint, the alternative is to file a lawsuit. And we're going to see the city paying out lawsuits for complaints instead of resolving their complaints through the system. And in terms of, kind of the COB and the OIM and the department getting the information at once, we are not investigators. We are reviewing their investigation. In order for us to actually conduct the investigations, it would be a completely different department. We would have to hire outside investigators to do the investigation. So that is why we review the investigation, and we get to determine whether they are sufficient or not sufficient. And the COB are volunteers. They can't put themselves in a position to do the day in and day out. Sorry.
I'll start with your idea first. What I think your idea is great in that it points out the opportunity that all of this presents, which is to figure out what the problems are, the challenges are, and then work collaboratively to identify solutions to them. And so ideas like that, I think, present a great starting place, right? But we've not had that conversation. We've just gone straight to a solution to a problem that we're not sure we agree on. And so I think that you really pointed that out nicely with your idea. I think Alexander, just brought up a really important point, which is that the city has divested in evidence-based approaches like STAR and the AIDS Center, and now we're talking about investing in approaches that have no evidence base and moving those forward. And it presents a very confusing picture, I think, to the community, and certainly the Citizen Oversight Board has picked this up, that we're sort of doing the opposite of what facts would suggest, right? And so, in this time, I think it's really important for us to just sort of start with the basics again and understand what is the problem we're trying to solve and how do we solve it together through evidence-based tools.
And Julia, just real quick, one plug for you all. You have a vacancy.
We have 2 vacancies, and so the question on how do people get involved, you can serve on the Citizen Oversight Board itself. There is a small stipend that comes along with that. It is a very large commitment, but we have a lot to do and to say in the city, and would love for you to be a part of that if you're interested.
And how do people find out about it?
There's a link on the website to apply. The 2 vacancies, one is appointed by the mayor and one is appointed by city council. Don't let that intimidate you. You don't have to know the mayor or your city council member, although there's one right here you could know. But you just apply through that, express your interest and say why you want to be a part of the board, and on you go.
Great, thank you. Well, I want to thank you all for this important evening, for your questions. I want to thank our panelists for being open to this conversation. And we know that everyone here is here for a reason, because you're interested, you're concerned, and you want to know what we're doing when it comes to police accountability, what is happening in our communities when it comes to public safety. We know that change doesn't happen quickly, and I think this is a testament to that fact. The fact that, Chief put forward this at the beginning of the year, and with, ongoing conversations with some of the groups that are sitting up here, some of the community members, nothing has yet happened. So I think that shows that change doesn't always happen right away or as rapidly as we might, sometimes we might hope. But I think what we do hope is that we can continue to have these transparent, we need transparent and accountability and dialogue, right? And that's what I'm hearing from folks here tonight, is having that opportunity to have the conversation, to listen to different perspectives, to listen to lived experience and different types of expertise. All of that is so invaluable when we're trying to create policy, and I know that from being a policymaker for 7 years now. It's listening to our community, it's listening to people who know what they're talking about, right, those experts, and trying to absorb all of that to come up with the best type of policy possible. So I want to thank you all for being here tonight, and if you could please give our panelists a round of applause.